So today's video, we're going to talk about identifying different fingerprint patterns. We briefly touched on the fact that there's three main types of patterns in the last video, but in this video we're going to break it down into more because if we can use fingerprints to identify an individual, there has to be more than just three different types. So let's get into that now. So first off, it's important to note it that there's a difference between the rolled fingerprints that you would get if you were taking somebody's fingerprints, flat ones that if you were just putting a fingerprint down yourself, and then what a latent print would look like. So when you're hopefully never admitted into a police station, they will take your fingerprints and they will roll your fingerprints. So they will go from the edge of your finger, roll it across into the other edge. They put these a 10 card looks like this, basically starting with your right thumb. They do the right thumb and then the fingers of your right hand and then left. So there's three main fingerprint patterns: arches, whorls, and loops. With an arch, we have the ridges starting on one side, and then they go and they leave the other, and basically there's a little like hump in between. Um, Arches are fairly rare. They're only 5% of all fingerprints. So that means if every person has 10 fingerprints, only one in every two people would have an arch. Whorls are more common. About one in three fingerprints are a whorl, and they look like a bullseye. Now it says they have two deltas. A delta is this feature right here, where it looks like, well, delta means triangle, right? You've got a little triangle here, you've got a little triangle here, and we can use those deltas. That's going to be one of the things that we use to identify individual fingerprints. And then with a loop pattern, loops have just one delta, so that delta is right here for this loop, and they either enter and exit from the same side. So the difference between an arch and a loop is that they're going to enter and then exit on that same side. And then we're going to want to be able to identify which side it enters and exits from. So with arches, we've got two different types. We've got what we call a plain arch. So a plain arch just kind of looks like a hill. And then we've got a tented arch. So in a tented arch, we've got a delta here, and then the fingerprint goes up and then back down. It's got a sharp spike. So the difference between the plain arch and the tented arch is the presence of that delta and the sharp spike in the middle of the fingerprint. For whorls, we've got a lot of different patterns that we can have. So first off is the plain whorl. So a plain whorl, well, all of these are going to have two deltas. So here's a delta, And then we've got the whorl pattern in between these two. If we draw a line between the two deltas, it touches the loops in this whorl here. So this line here goes over those ridge loops. That makes it a plain whorl. A central pocket loop whorl has a delta, another delta, and then when we connect that line does not pass. So our whorl ridges are up here, and then the line does not pass between these two, here to here. A double loop whorl has two deltas, but basically it has two loops coming in from either side. And then an accidental whorl is going to have three or more. So here's one, and here's one. Three or more deltas would be an accidental whorl. Before we talk about loops, we gotta have a quick mini lesson. So first off, we've got the bones of the arm. Here's the humerus, so that's the upper arm bone. And then the forearm has two different bones in it. There's the radius, which is on the side of your thumb, and then the ulna, which is on the side of your pinky. So we are going to identify loops as either being radial loops or ulnar loops if that loop points to either the radius, so the thumb side, or the ulna, the pinky side. So real quick, radial and ulnar loops. So we've got two different loop patterns here. You can see each one has a delta. This one, the loop is coming and exiting here on the left. So that would be a radial loop if it's on the right hand. So if you put your right thumb down, that would be exiting on the thumb side. But if you put your left thumb down, it exits on the side opposite your thumb. So basically, this is going to switch for the other side. So on your right hand, these loops would exit towards your pinky finger. On your left hand, these loops would exit towards your thumb. And this is if you're looking at it with your thumb down on top, or with the fingerprint down on top, which side it's going to go to. So you gotta just keep that in mind, that you're not looking at the fingerprint as if you were looking at the bottom or the fingerprint part of the finger. You're looking through the fingernail. So if we had right thumbprints from all of these, what type of patterns do we have? So this first one here, if we look at it, we shouldn't see any deltas. So if there's no delta, that means it's going to be a plain arch. This one, we can identify a delta right here, and it's entering on the left, exiting on the right, with a sharp spike in the middle. That's going to be a tented arch. Looking at these ridge patterns here, they enter on the right, exit on the right, so it's a loop pattern. We've got a delta right here. If this is a right thumbprint, these exit towards the pinky side, so that would make this an ulnar loop. We've got a delta here. We enter on the left, we exit on the left. It's a right thumbprint, So this would be a radial loop. For this one here, we've got a delta and another delta here. If I draw a line between the two deltas, it passes through the ridge loops, the whorl ridges here. So from here to here, that's going to make that a plane whorl. I've got a whorl. I've got a whorl here. I know what the answer is. I've got a delta here, and I've got a delta here. So my whorl loop is here. I can draw a line from here to here without passing through those loops. That makes that a central. So once we identify all the different types, so we had 8 different types that we broke it down into further, we want to take a look at the minutiae. So minutiae are very, very small features on every ridge. And these are really what we're going to get into for fingerprint identification. You're going to have about 150 ridge characteristics on the average full fingerprint. So if we roll a fingerprint, we should be able to find around 150 individual characteristics for each one. To get a match, we're going to look for 10 to 16 specific points of reference. So we've got the basic minutiae, things like the core, so that's going to be the center of a loop or whorl, where that's positioned. We're going to look for the deltas that we've been talking about. So we've also got smaller minutiae, things that are going to be a lot harder to see. So things like ending ridges, where basically we have a ridge and it just stops. Bifurcations, where a ridge splits into 2 ridges. Island ridges, which are just short little ridges in between 2 other ones. Dots, which are just really small islands. Bridges, where one ridge connects to another. A spur, which doesn't quite connect to another. An eye, sometimes called an enclosure or an island or a lake. Basically, the ridge bifurcates and then unbifurcates. A double bifurcation, where it splits and then splits again. We've got our deltas, where we've got basically a split and then a small dot, and then a trifurcation, where it splits into 3 different ridges. Now, the reliability of a fingerprint identification can be called into question. So in 1995, 156 fingerprint examiners were given a test, and 1 in 5 of them made at least one false positive identification. So how do we reduce errors? Well, we've got the International Association for Identification, which certifies fingerprint examiners. So basically, at the end of this course, you're not going to be a certified fingerprint examiner. You actually have to put a lot more work into it than watching these two videos. Sorry. But once you're certified, you should be much more capable. When we're talking about fingerprint analysis, it's very difficult. So in 1987, FBI had about 23 million fingerprint cards on file, and searching through those could take up to 3 months. Now, if you've got somebody waiting in, a jail cell looking to be sentenced, or, you have a suspect that you want to make an arrest, 3 months is kind of a long time to get that done. Even doing a match with a computer would take longer than just a few seconds, and that's each individual match. So it has to be checked through 23 million different fingerprints. That's going to take a long time. So in 1999, the FBI started using what's called the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS. And basically, it contains 47 million people's fingerprints, and they're stored and searched electronically. So this was a big step forward in being able to identify fingerprints quickly and easily. However, it still takes 2 hours. So when you're watching, CSI or something like that, and they plug in the fingerprint results, and then they get the results back in 2 minutes. That's not really how. To reduce the search time, the Henry primary classification system was developed. So basically, think of it like the Dewey Decimal System for organizing fingerprints for identification. So each finger is given a number. So you've got the right thumb is number 1, index is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The first 2 are given, so if you have any whorls on either of these, you get 16 points. So in this example, the thumb has a whorl, so it's 16. No whorl on the index finger, so it's 0. A whorl on the right ring finger gets 8. And then none on the middle gets 0. And then you've got 4 would be a whorl on the left thumb. 0 would be no whorl on the right little finger. 2 for the middle and index finger of the left hand, and then ring and little finger on the left hand get 1 point if you have any of those. So then you add them up across the top, you add them up across the bottom, and for this one we get 14 over 18. Then we add 1 to the numerator and denominator, and we get 15/19. So that would be the Henry classification. It's the primary classification. So if we were doing a manual search and we wanted to figure out, we knew that you had a Henry classification of 15/19, then we could go and basically come up with what, all the other people in our system that had a 15/19. And then we could go from there to look up, there's secondary classifications of, what the, radial or ulnar loops, and, there's a couple different levels of beyond this primary classification that we can figure out how much, or the best way to reduce the number of fingerprints that we have to go through and look for matches in minutia. So that's how it's done.